High above the world, where storms swallow sound and snow buries time, a creature walks through blizzards not for glory, but for mercy. This is the Saint Bernard, the guardian of the Alps. Long before engines and rescue helicopters, before borders and ski lodges, there was only the mountain. Cold, silent, and merciless. The Great St. Bernard Pass, carved between Switzerland and Italy, was once the only route through the high Alps, a treacherous path claimed by snow, ice, and sudden storms. Travelers called it the White Death. But standing against that death was a monastery, a place of faith and refuge founded by monks nearly 1,000 years ago. Its mission was simple: to give shelter to the lost. And to fulfill that mission, the monks bred a companion. A dog strong enough to move through snowdrifts, brave enough to face avalanches, and gentle enough to carry hope in its eyes. The first St. Bernards were not called heroes, they were called brothers. Their story began not in luxury but in service. Each winter, the mountains claimed lives: pilgrims, merchants, soldiers. Many vanished without a trace. The monks would send out their dogs to search. Massive, thick-coated, moving ghosts of mercy. They did not fear the wind or the frost. They learned to read the mountain's language, to follow faint scents buried beneath snow, to hear heartbeats through silence. And when they found the fallen, they did what humans could not. They dug with their paws, pushed through snowbanks, and lay beside the freezing traveler, sharing their warmth until help arrived. Sometimes they barked to summon the monks. Other times they refused to leave, guarding the living and the dead alike. They worked in teams, each dog knowing its duty without words. One would clear the snow, another would fetch aid. A third would lie beside the body, breathing life where none should remain. For centuries they did this, without fame, without training manuals, without ever asking why. It was not obedience, it was compassion, written into their very nature. The monks kept meticulous records of every rescue. Some dogs saved dozens of lives. One saved more than 40. His name would echo through history. Barry. But Barry's story would come later. For now, there were hundreds like him, unnamed, unseen, walking through storms that erased everything but their footprints. Each time a traveler heard that low bark in the distance, they knew salvation was near. And when a St. Bernard appeared, massive, solemn, eyes filled with warmth, they said it was like seeing an angel in fur. But even angels bleed. The mountains took as much as they gave. Many dogs never returned. Avalanches buried them. Frost claimed them. Yet the monastery never stopped sending them out, because that was their purpose, and they fulfilled it with unwavering devotion. It wasn't just strength that made them heroes, it was empathy. They seemed to understand fear itself, to sense when a soul was fading, and to bring it back with touch, breath, and warmth. Travelers who survived often wept when describing it. They said the dogs didn't just save their bodies, they saved their faith, because to be found in that endless white, to feel a living creature press close and refuse to leave you, that was proof that God had not forgotten you. The monks believed the same. They said the St. Bernard was not merely a dog, but a vessel of divine mercy. By the 17th century, the breed had become part of legend. Pilgrims whispered prayers to St. Bernard of Menthon, the monastery's namesake, and to the dogs that bore his name. In those days, winters could last 6 months, snow-buried paths 20 feet deep. The monastery stood like a stone fortress against oblivion, and beside its doors, the dogs waited, watchful, ready. They were not chained. They were not forced. They simply knew when it was time. And when the bell rang, they walked into the storm, as they always did. Without hesitation, without fear, with hearts as vast as the mountains themselves. Through them, humanity learned something extraordinary. That compassion could be as strong as ice, as vast as the Alps, and as endless as faith. And from that frozen monastery, a legend began to spread of a breed born not for war or wealth, but for rescue, for mercy, for love. In the high Alps, storms don't simply arrive. They descend like gods. Winds scream through the valleys, snow falls in walls, and daylight vanishes beneath a white sky. For most, this was death. For the St. Bernard, it was a calling. When the monastery bell tolled through the blizzard, the dogs stirred from their stone kennels. The monks would wrap themselves in furs, tie ropes to the dogs' collars, and open the great wooden doors. Out they went, into the abyss. No man could see more than a few feet ahead, but the St. Bernards could sense what eyes could not. They moved in silence, heads low, tails steady, reading the wind like scripture. The snow muffled all sound except for the faint crunch of their paws, and the low murmur of monks whispering prayers behind them. Hours would pass. Then suddenly, a bark, low, sharp, urgent. The dogs had found someone. Buried deep in snow, a traveler gasped for air. Half-conscious, frozen, his body already surrendering. The St. Bernard dug furiously, massive paws flinging snow aside like shovels. When the man's face emerged, the dog pressed close, its warm breath hitting his skin, its heartbeat thundering against his chest. Life answering death. The monks would follow the sound, digging alongside their companions, lifting the lost man from his grave of snow. Then together, man, monk, and dog, they would begin the long journey home. Each rescue took hours, sometimes days, and every time they returned, another storm waited. Another life needed saving. But the dogs never hesitated. They didn't need orders. They didn't need hope. They simply went. The records of the monastery speak of hundreds saved. By the 1700s, the St. Bernard had become the mountain's guardian, its living soul, and among them all, one name rose above the rest. Barry. Barry was born around 1800, a golden-red St. Bernard with eyes dark as earth. He served the hospice for 12 years. In that time, he saved the lives of over 40 people. One story tells of Barry finding a young boy frozen beneath snow. He licked the child's face to warm him, nudged him gently awake, and carried him back on his back through the blizzard. He became a symbol of everything the breed stood for: instinct, courage, and mercy beyond understanding. Even Napoleon's soldiers crossing the Alps spoke of St. Bernards appearing out of the mist. Massive, ghost-like figures guiding men to safety through mountain passes. They called them the monks of fur. But for every life saved, some were lost. The avalanches were merciless. Many St. Bernards never returned from missions. The monks buried them near the monastery walls, marking their graves with simple stones and saying, "Here lies a soul that never feared the storm." They were not just dogs. They were brothers. In time, artists began painting them, writers recording their feats. They added myths, the brandy barrel around the neck, a symbol of warmth and hope. In truth, the monks never used it, but the world loved the image. A dog walking through endless snow, with salvation hanging from its chest. That myth, though untrue, captured something real, because every St. Bernard carried salvation in its heart. They didn't chase, they didn't fight. They rescued. When blizzards erased the path, they became the path. When humans gave up, they pressed on. And when hope froze solid, they melted it. With warmth, with loyalty, with love. There was something supernatural in their calm. They were not frantic, not desperate. They worked with patience, as if time itself waited for them. Travelers described seeing them emerge from white-out storms, like giants from another world. Massive, slow-moving, eyes filled with light. For the dying, that sight was the line between heaven and earth. Even today, historians struggle to explain how these dogs could sense life beneath meters of snow, or why they refused to leave bodies behind, even when death had already taken hold. But the monks never questioned it. They believed the St. Bernard had been chosen, a bridge between the divine and the human, between mercy and endurance. Every rescue was a prayer in motion. Every life saved, a testament to faith. And through their work, the St. Bernard became something greater than a breed. It became a symbol of the good that survives in a cruel world, of the strength that serves, not conquers, of a love so deep it would walk into the storm again and again without ever asking why. As centuries passed, the storms still came. The mountains never softened, but the world below began to change. The small monastery in the Alps, once a quiet sanctuary, became a beacon to travelers from every corner of Europe, and with every pilgrim rescued, the legend of the St. Bernard grew. News spread of dogs that could find the lost beneath snow, that guided armies through blizzards, that defied death with nothing but heart and instinct. They were no longer just guardians of the Alps. They were symbols of divine mercy. Word of their courage reached kings, explorers, and artists. Paintings began to appear. Massive dogs standing atop mountain ridges, their fur glowing against the white, their eyes steady, their presence serene. But no story captured the world's imagination like that of Barry. Barry lived at the monastery from 1800 to 1812. In those 12 years, he rescued more than 40 people from the snow. Each save was a miracle, each story a testament. It was said he could sense life beneath meters of ice, that he dug with the desperation of a creature who refused to accept loss. His most famous rescue came during a storm that lasted 3 days. When the monks finally found him, he had located a child buried in snow, licked his face to keep him awake, and carried him on his back to safety. When Barry finally passed, they did not bury him. They preserved him, a hero, a saint in fur. To this day, his body rests in Switzerland's Natural History Museum, his heart still part of the monastery that raised him. On his monument, the monks wrote one line: "He saved the lives of more than 40 people. He died from exhaustion. May his spirit live forever." And it did. Barry became the face of heroism itself. Children grew up hearing tales of the dog who fought the mountain and won. Artists painted him. Writers praised him. And soon, the image of a St. Bernard carrying a barrel around its neck became one of the most recognized symbols of courage in the world. The barrel, of course, was never real. The monks never strapped brandy to their dogs. But the myth endured, because it told the truth in its own way. The barrel was a symbol of warmth in the cold, of hope in despair, of rescue when rescue seemed impossible. And isn't that exactly what the St. Bernard was? Even as the 19th century advanced and new breeds emerged, none carried such reverence. None represented the fusion of faith and courage so completely. Napoleon himself, crossing the Great St. Bernard Pass, spoke of seeing the dogs move through snow like living prayers. He ordered his men to honor them, calling them les anges du col, the angels of the pass. By the late 1800s, the St. Bernard had spread across Europe. Breeders in Switzerland, France, and England worked to preserve the bloodline of the monastery dogs. They grew even larger, massive, majestic, gentle. But the monks worried. The bigger the dog, the slower it became in deep snow. The original rescue dogs had been smaller, leaner, faster, made for endurance, not display. So they kept a few of the old lines pure, never for profit, but for purpose. Because for them, the St. Bernard was not a symbol. It was salvation. Tourists began to visit the monastery, hoping to see the heroes of legend. Children would cling to their massive fur, posing for sketches and photographs. And through it all, the dogs remained what they had always been: calm, patient, humble. They didn't know what fame meant. They didn't need to. Their work spoke louder than any monument. Even as machines replaced men on the trails and technology made rescues faster, the monks kept their tradition alive. Every generation of St. Bernards was raised with the same mission to serve. And serve they did. Through wars, blizzards, and changing centuries, the dogs continued their quiet duty. Their names changed. The world changed. But their eyes, those deep, kind eyes, never did. Because what the world saw as legend, they lived as daily life. They didn't know they were famous. They didn't know they were heroes. They only knew that when the mountain called, they had to answer. It was not instinct alone, it was purpose. And from that purpose, a legacy was born that would outlive empires. The St. Bernard was no longer just a dog of the Alps. It had become a universal symbol of rescue, compassion, and faith. The embodiment of all that is good in humanity, reflected through the eyes of an animal. Strength can lift a mountain, but only love can lift a soul. And no creature has ever carried both quite like the St. Bernard. For centuries, the world called them heroes, the saviors of the Alps, the angels of the monastery. But those who lived beside them knew a deeper truth, that beneath their power lay hearts vast enough to hold the pain of others. To meet a St. Bernard is to feel small, not because of its size, but because of its presence. They have the stillness of old souls, the calm of creatures who have seen both death and survival, and who understand the fragile line between them. That calm isn't taught, it's born, a reflection of the monks who raised them, men of silence, prayer, and mercy. For generations, those monks taught their dogs without words. They led by example through kindness and patience, and the dogs absorbed it until compassion itself became instinct. That's why, when disaster struck, the St. Bernard didn't panic. It didn't bark wildly or run in fear. It walked toward danger not as a beast, but as a guardian. And when it found the lost, it didn't drag them roughly from the snow. It lay beside them, pressing warmth into lifeless limbs, breathing steady and slow, as if whispering, "You're not alone." That is the heart beneath the snow. They didn't just rescue bodies, they revived spirits. In their silent companionship, men found the courage to live again. Even today, owners describe the same quiet power. A St. Bernard doesn't need to be loud to be heard. Its love speaks through presence. When you're hurting, it comes closer. When you cry, it rests its head on your knee. When the world feels heavy, it simply leans against you. And somehow, the weight lifts. They don't heal you with energy. They heal you with peace. That's what makes them different from other giants. Many large breeds are proud, restless, fierce. The St. Bernard is none of those things. Its greatness is measured in gentleness, its courage in patience. Children climb onto their backs as if onto living mountains. The dogs don't move, don't resist. They just turn their eyes, soft and kind, as if saying, "You are safe here." To them, every human is fragile, and fragility is sacred. That's why, throughout history, St. Bernards have been drawn to children, the sick, the lost, and the lonely. They are creatures of empathy, able to sense the heart before the words. And perhaps it's no accident that they were born in a monastery, because in their silence, they became the perfect messengers of grace. In a world obsessed with noise, they remind us that love can be quiet, that it can simply be. They never rush, they never demand, they wait. And somehow, that waiting, that patience, feels like understanding. It's what made them perfect for rescue, and what makes them perfect for companionship. Whether lying beside a child's bed, guarding a home through a long night, or standing in the snow with their fur dusted in white, they are living proof that gentleness can save lives, that kindness can be stronger than fear. They have a gift few creatures possess, the ability to bring calm to chaos. When an avalanche roared, the St. Bernard didn't flinch. It moved through the storm with the same rhythm as breath. When fear froze human hearts, its steady warmth broke the ice. That's why even now, their image remains a symbol of peace. Not only because they rescued lives, but because they carried serenity into the most violent places on Earth. Every hair on their coat tells a story of struggle and salvation. Every heartbeat echoes with centuries of devotion. And when you look into their eyes, you don't see an animal. You see something older, something that remembers every person it has ever saved, every storm it has ever walked through. They are the mountains, made flesh and mercy. It's said that when a Saint Bernard sleeps, the monastery bell still rings in its dreams. That somewhere deep inside, a part of it still walks through snow, still searches for the lost, still carries warmth through the cold. That instinct, that love, never dies. It's passed from generation to generation, from mountain to home, from legend to life. Because while the world changes, the St. Bernard's heart does not. It remains what it has always been, massive, unwavering, and full of grace. In the thin air of the Alps, where heaven feels close enough to touch, legends are not written in ink. They are carved in ice, etched in wind, and remembered through the hearts that endure them. The St. Bernard is one such legend. It was born not of war nor conquest, but of compassion, a creature bred not to destroy, but to deliver. And though centuries have passed, its story has never melted. When the last rescue bells fell silent at the monastery, when snowmobiles replaced footsteps, and helicopters replaced hope, the monks still kept their dogs. Not because they needed them, but because the world still did. To this day, the great St. Bernard Hospice remains, its stone walls echoing with prayers and memories, and within them, the descendants of those ancient guardians still live. They no longer walk into storms to save travelers, but the instinct remains, that quiet readiness, that unspoken promise. If someone calls, I will go. Visitors from across the globe come to see them now, to touch history, to look into the eyes of kindness itself. Children press their hands against fur that once carried lives through blizzards, and for a moment, time stands still. Because these are not ordinary dogs, they are echoes of something sacred, a living bridge between man and mercy. The monks say that when a St. Bernard stands on the snow and looks out across the mountains, it's not simply watching, it's remembering. Every gust of wind is a whisper of those it once saved. Every flake of snow a soul it once carried home. That's what makes their legacy eternal. They remind us that true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to face it for the sake of another. They remind us that power without compassion is hollow, and that even in a world of machines and noise, there is still room for silence, for patience, for grace. The St. Bernard's image has circled the world, painted in halls, carved in stone, and immortalized in stories and films. Yet no picture, no tale can capture what it feels like to stand beside one. You don't simply see their size, you feel their stillness, that calm gravity that makes the air gentler. In that moment, you understand why men once trusted them with their lives, because everything about them, their eyes, their breath, their presence, says one thing: you are safe. That feeling has no language. It transcends culture, faith, and time. It is the universal truth they were born to embody. And that truth lives on, not only in the mountains, but in homes around the world. Families still wake to find a Saint Bernard standing at their bedside, watching over them. Children still bury their faces in fur and find peace there. Rescue teams still train with them, trusting in instincts older than history itself. Even now, in an age of satellites and GPS, there are moments when technology fails and instinct takes its place. And when it does, the St. Bernard is still there, calm, steadfast, ready. Because some kinds of courage never go out of style. They have simply changed their landscape, from avalanches to living rooms, from mountain passes to hearts in need. Everywhere they go, they carry the same mission: to bring comfort to the lost, to bring peace to the frightened, to remind the world that kindness is strength. And though their fur may now brush against grass instead of snow, their souls still belong to the mountain, because that's where they were born, in silence, in struggle, in service. Their story isn't about power, it's about purpose. It's about choosing to walk towards suffering, to carry warmth into the cold, and to expect nothing in return. It's about love, the kind that doesn't ask, doesn't hesitate, and never leaves. In every sense, the St. Bernard is what humanity could be at its best: strong, selfless, gentle, and good. And maybe that's why its story has lasted so long, because deep down, we all want to believe in something that pure, something that stands firm when everything else falls away, something that will come for us when we're lost in the storm. That is the St. Bernard! That is the guardian of the Alps. And though the snow melts and the centuries pass, its courage, its heart remains untouched. For legends do not fade, they live on, in memory, in faith, in every act of kindness that echoes their example. So the next time you hear the wind over the mountains, listen closely. You might hear it. The low bark of a rescuer long gone, the sound of paws in the snow, and the voice of the eternal guardian, who still walks where mercy is needed most, because heroes may rest, but legends never.